Welcome to Jack Invests. Let me start with a simple but uncomfortable question. If you're earning a decent income, why does money still feel tight? Think about it for a moment. Your salary comes in. Rent or your mortgage goes out. Car payment. Credit cards. A lifestyle that doesn't feel luxurious, but somehow isn't cheap either. And by the end of the month, there's one quiet thought in your head. Where did it all go? This isn't about being bad with money. And it's not just happening to you. Across the United States and Europe, millions of working professionals are earning more than ever before, yet feeling less financially free than they expected. On paper, things look fine. A stable job, a reasonable income, no extreme spending. But emotionally, financially, something feels off. Today's video isn't a motivational talk. There are no shortcuts here. No get-rich-fast ideas. And no hustle culture. Instead, we're going to talk about something much quieter and much more dangerous. The silent fees that slowly destroy wealth. These aren't taxes. They don't show up clearly on a bank statement. And no one warns you about them. They're built into modern life. Into the way we finance cars. Into how we use credit. Into the pressure to maintain a certain lifestyle once income increases. Most people don't even realize they're paying these fees. Because everyone around them is doing the same thing. And that's the problem. By the end of this video, I want you to understand one important idea. Most people don't stay financially stuck because they earn too little. They stay stuck because too much of their future income is already quietly committed. Here on Jack Invests, we don't talk about money in an emotional or dramatic way. We talk about it calmly, logically, honestly. If you enjoy thoughtful, reality-based finance content similar in style to channels like Nick Invests or Bob Invests, you're in the right place. This channel is for students, early career earners, and working professionals who did what they were told was right, but still feel financially constrained. You don't need to feel guilty while watching this video. You don't need to feel scared. And you definitely don't need to feel rushed. Just listen. Because once you see these silent fees clearly, you can't unsee them. And awareness, quiet, unemotional awareness, is often the first real step toward financial intelligence. So get comfortable. No notes needed. Just stay with me until the end. Welcome once again to Jack Invests. Let's begin with a reality most people avoid talking about. Why does life feel heavier even when on paper you're doing fine, not struggling, not failing, not behind in the dramatic sense, but constantly tense? The kind of tension that sits quietly in the background while you're at work, while you're driving, while you're scrolling at night. It's not panic, it's not crisis, it's that low-level pressure that never really turns off. And what's uncomfortable is this: most people experiencing it are not broke. They're educated, employed, responsible adults. They earn salaries that would have sounded impressive to their parents. And yet the moment something unexpected happens, a car repair, a medical bill, a job restructure, everything suddenly feels fragile. This isn't a motivation problem, it isn't a discipline problem. And it definitely isn't about being bad with money. It's about financial stress quietly shaping how you think, how you behave, and how much mental space your life actually has. Imagine a fairly typical scenario. Nothing extreme. A young professional in the US or Europe, late 20s or early 30s. You earn a decent salary. Let's say around $60,000 to $80,000 a year in the US, or the equivalent in euros or pounds. After taxes, social contributions, health insurance, maybe a pension deduction, what actually lands in your account each month feels smaller than expected. Rent or a mortgage takes the first bite. Not a luxury place, just something clean, safe, and reasonably close to work. Then the car payment or public transport costs if you live in a major European city. Insurance, utilities, a phone plan, streaming subscriptions you barely think about anymore, groceries that somehow cost more every year. Then come the quieter expenses: student loan payments, credit cards used for flexibility, monthly installments for things you didn't buy outright because everyone told you that spreading payments was smarter. None of these feel irresponsible on their own. In fact, each one feels logical, normal, adult. But here's the strange part. Even when you're covering everything on time, even when you're not missing payments, even when your lifestyle looks stable from the outside, there's still this persistent sense that you're one step away from trouble. You hesitate before opening your banking app. You mentally calculate the days until the next paycheck. You feel guilty spending money on rest or joy or time because something in the back of your mind says you should be saving more, but you're not sure where that money is supposed to come from. Financial stress doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't say you're failing. It whispers, be careful, all the time, and that whisper slowly changes how you live. What most people don't realize is that this kind of stress is not just emotional, it's cognitive. It takes up real mental bandwidth. When your finances are tight, not desperate, just tight, you make decisions differently. You delay choices, you avoid looking too closely. You prioritize short-term comfort over long-term clarity without consciously deciding to. You stay in jobs you don't like because uncertainty feels dangerous. You say yes to work you don't respect because saying no feels risky. You don't negotiate pay because stability feels more important than fairness. Over time, your world subtly shrinks, not because you lack ambition, but because financial stress trains you to value safety over possibility. This is why everything changes when financial stress is removed, not because you suddenly become richer, smarter, or more disciplined, but because your thinking becomes quieter, clearer, more patient. When money stops being a constant background problem, your brain gets space back, and most people underestimate how powerful that space is. They assume financial freedom is about luxury upgrades or early retirement fantasies, but the first real benefit is psychological relief. The absence of constant calculation, the ability to think a few steps ahead without fear creeping in, the freedom to make decisions based on logic instead of pressure. What we rarely talk about is that modern financial systems are not designed to make this kind of mental calm easy. They are designed to normalize permanent obligation, monthly payments, installments, minimums, automatic deductions. From the outside, it looks like convenience. From the inside, it feels like life is always slightly ahead of you, demanding attention. And once you accept that as normal, you stop questioning it. You stop asking whether this constant tension is necessary. You start believing adulthood is supposed to feel this way. And that belief, that quiet acceptance, is where the real cost begins. Let's slow this down and look at the mechanics of a normal month, because financial stress doesn't come from dramatic mistakes. It comes from ordinary math playing out over time. Picture a monthly paycheck landing in your account. In the US, someone earning $70,000 a year might take home around $4,200 a month after federal tax, state tax, healthcare, and retirement deductions. In much of Europe, the gross number might look similar on paper, but once income tax, national insurance, and social contributions are removed, the net result feels roughly the same. What matters is not the headline salary but the number that actually arrives. That number becomes your reality, everything else is theoretical. From that $4,200, rent or a mortgage takes perhaps $1,400 to $1,800 depending on location. Not luxury, just proximity to work and basic comfort. Add utilities and internet, add a phone plan, add transportation, maybe a $450 car payment, fuel, insurance, maintenance, or alternatively public transport passes and occasional ride shares. Groceries might quietly hit $400 to $600. Now layer in student loan payments, which for many Americans and Europeans last well into their 30s. Credit card minimums that exist not because of reckless spending, but because life doesn't line up perfectly with cash flow. Add one or two subscriptions you signed up for years ago and never canceled. None of this feels extravagant, it feels like participation. By the time the month settles, you're left with a few $100s of flexibility. This is the money that's supposed to handle savings, emergencies, social life, clothing, gifts, travel, and anything unexpected. This is where stress lives, because this money isn't excess, it's fragile. And when something unplanned shows up, it doesn't get absorbed, it spills, it goes on a card, it becomes next month's problem. What's important to understand is that this situation isn't caused by a single bad decision. It's the cumulative effect of a system that encourages you to convert large, infrequent costs into small, permanent monthly obligations. Take the car, for example, not a luxury car, a reasonable one, maybe $25,000 financed over 5 or 6 years. The payment feels manageable, $400 to $500 a month. But what's easy to miss is how that payment interacts with everything else. Over 5 years, you're not just paying the car price. You're paying interest, insurance premiums, depreciation, and the opportunity cost of not having that cash flow available. That $450 a month could have been $5,400 a year of breathing room. Instead, it's pre-committed, locked, non-negotiable, and psychologically that matters more than people think. The same logic applies to credit cards and installment plans. When you buy something outright, the pain is immediate and visible. When you finance it, the pain is delayed and diluted. $10 here, $40 there, $100 somewhere else. Each decision feels small, responsible even, but the stress doesn't come from the size of any single payment, it comes from the number of them. Your income becomes less flexible not because you earn too little, but because so much of it is already spoken for before you get a chance to think. You're not deciding how to use your money each month, you're confirming decisions made in the past. This is the hidden flaw most people never see clearly. Financial stress isn't just about expenses being high, it's about optionality being low. When your monthly obligations are heavy, your margin for error disappears. One missed paycheck becomes dangerous. One unexpected bill becomes emotionally loud. Even when things are going well, your nervous system doesn't trust the situation because it knows how tight the margins really are. And so you live cautiously, not recklessly, cautiously. You delay taking risks that could improve your future because you're busy protecting the present. What makes this more difficult is that modern consumer culture presents this structure as success. A finance car is framed as progress, a larger apartment is framed as growth, upgrading your lifestyle as your income rises is framed as reward, and individually none of these choices are wrong. The issue is that they all rely on the same assumption that your income will remain stable, predictable, and uninterrupted. That assumption rarely holds perfectly over decades. Jobs change, industries shift. Health intervenes, burnout happens, but your monthly obligations don't adjust easily. They remain fixed while your energy, focus, or income fluctuates. This is why people who earn well often feel more stressed than those who earn less but live with fewer obligations. The stress is not proportional to income. It's proportional to how much of your income is already promised away. And once that realization clicks, the picture changes. The problem was never that you weren't working hard enough or budgeting well enough. The problem is that the system quietly trained you to optimize for comfort today at the cost of calm tomorrow. And most people don't see that trade-off until they've already locked themselves into it. What keeps this cycle going isn't ignorance, it's psychology. Most people in the US and Europe understand, at least intellectually, that debt creates pressure and that lower fixed expenses would feel better. But knowing something abstractly and feeling it in daily life are two very different things. Financial stress changes how the brain prioritizes. When money feels tight, your thinking narrows. You focus on getting through the month, not designing the next 5 years. You optimize for relief, not resilience. And the system is built to take advantage of exactly that mental state. Monthly payments are psychologically attractive because they convert a large, emotionally uncomfortable decision into a series of small, tolerable ones. A $20,000 purchase feels serious. A $380 monthly payment feels manageable. Your brain doesn't experience them the same way, even though the long-term outcome may be similar or worse. This is not a flaw unique to you. It's a known cognitive bias. Humans are far more sensitive to immediate discomfort than future cost. We heavily discount what happens later, especially when later feels abstract. And financial institutions, advertisers, and even employers structure choices around this bias because it works. Once you're living inside this framework, something subtle happens. You start to confuse affordability with sustainability. If you can make the payment this month, you assume the decision is fine. But sustainability isn't about surviving the current month, it's about how fragile your life becomes when conditions change. The more payments you stack, the more your future depends on everything going right. Stable job, stable health, stable economy, stable energy. Financial stress is your intuition quietly noticing how many variables have to cooperate for your life to remain comfortable. Over years, this stress compounds, not just financially but professionally and emotionally. You avoid career moves that could temporarily reduce income, even if they offer better long-term growth. You hesitate to invest in education or skills because the short-term cash flow hit feels threatening. You stay in cities, relationships, or routines that no longer fit because changing them feels financially risky. None of these decisions are dramatic. They're reasonable responses to pressure. But taken together, they shape a life that's narrower than it could have been. There's also a long-term mathematical cost that's easy to underestimate. Every dollar committed to fixed payments is a dollar that can't absorb shocks or take advantage of opportunities. Over a decade, that flexibility is often more valuable than raw income growth. Someone earning slightly less but with fewer obligations can save more consistently, recover faster from setbacks, and make bolder choices when opportunities appear. Meanwhile, someone earning more but carrying heavy monthly commitments may look successful from the outside while feeling permanently behind internally. This is why financial stress is so corrosive. It doesn't usually ruin people overnight, it slowly erodes their confidence in the future. It teaches them implicitly that life is something to manage rather than shape. And because this erosion happens gradually, most people never notice it clearly. They attribute their fatigue to work, their hesitation to personality, their dissatisfaction to external circumstances. Rarely do they trace it back to the constant cognitive load of managing a life with no slack. If this pattern continues unchecked, the long-term outcome is predictable. You reach your 40s or 50s having earned well, worked hard, and followed the rules and still feel behind. Retirement feels distant. Options feel limited, stress feels normal, and by then unwinding the commitments takes time, not because it's impossible but because habits, expectations, and identities have formed around them. The tragedy isn't that people fail financially. It's that many succeed on paper while never experiencing the calm and clarity they assumed success would bring. When you look closely at people who appear calm about money, not flashy, not unusually lucky, just steady, what stands out isn't superior income or extreme frugality. It's how they think about obligations. Financially intelligent people tend to view monthly payments as a form of risk, not convenience. They're aware sometimes intuitively that every fixed expense narrows the future. So instead of asking, "Can I afford this?" they quietly ask a different question: "What does this commit me to?" That single shift in thinking changes everything, because it reframes money from a consumption tool into a planning tool. These people don't necessarily avoid spending. They spend deliberately. They understand that comfort bought with flexibility feels different from comfort bought with debt. When they take on an expense, they want it to be easy to undo. They value reversibility. A smaller apartment in a good location might not impress anyone, but it allows them to walk away from a bad job or move cities without panic. An older car that's paid for doesn't signal success, but it removes a permanent claim on future income. This isn't about minimalism or self-denial. It's about preserving room to think. What's interesting is how this mindset affects their behavior under pressure. Because they're not constantly worried about covering fixed costs, they respond more rationally to setbacks. A layoff is still unpleasant, but it's not catastrophic. A market downturn is uncomfortable, but it doesn't force reactive decisions. This emotional stability isn't a personality trait, it's a structural outcome. When your life requires less money to function, you gain time. And time, more than income, is what allows good decisions to compound. Another quiet difference is how these individuals interpret lifestyle upgrades. They don't automatically scale their spending with income increases, not because they're afraid to enjoy life, but because they understand that lifestyle inflation is sticky. Once you get used to a certain level of spending, stepping back feels like loss, even if the original level was perfectly fine. So they increase comfort slowly, intentionally, and often in ways that don't add permanent monthly costs. They might spend on experiences, flexibility, or quality that lasts, rather than on things that lock in future obligations. This way of thinking also changes how work is experienced. When you're not financially stressed, work becomes a choice rather than a trap. You can negotiate more confidently. You can say no without fear. You can tolerate short-term discomfort for long-term alignment. Over time, this tends to lead to better outcomes, not because these people are more aggressive, but because they're less desperate. Employers, clients, and even colleagues respond differently to someone who isn't quietly under pressure. Calm is persuasive. The most important part of this perspective shift is subtle. Financially intelligent people don't see money as a measure of worth or success. They see it as a tool for reducing unnecessary stress. Their goal isn't to maximize lifestyle but to minimize fragility. They understand that the real upgrade isn't a bigger paycheck or a nicer car. It's waking up without that low-level anxiety in the background. And once that anxiety is gone, something surprising happens. Life doesn't become perfect. It becomes clearer, decisions feel less rushed, trade-offs feel more visible, and progress, though slower on the surface, becomes far more durable. When financial stress is removed, life doesn't suddenly turn exciting or luxurious. It becomes quieter, and that quiet is often mistaken for boredom by people who have never experienced it. But in that quiet, something important happens. You start to notice how much of your energy was being spent on mental bookkeeping, tracking due dates, worrying about balances, rehearsing worst-case scenarios. Without that constant background noise, your attention returns to things that actually move your life forward. Your health improves not because you bought something new, but because your nervous system isn't constantly bracing for impact. What's important to understand is that this change isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive as a breakthrough moment. It unfolds gradually as your obligations shrink and your margin grows. You stop checking your account before small decisions, you stop feeling tense when the calendar turns, you stop viewing every expense as a potential threat, and in that space you gain perspective. You can think long-term without feeling irresponsible. You can plan without fear disguising itself as caution. There's no moral victory in this. No badge of discipline, no superiority, just relief. Financial calm doesn't make you better than anyone else. It simply makes you harder to manipulate by marketing, by fear, by short-term thinking. And that's why it's so powerful. Once you experience it, you stop chasing upgrades that add pressure. You become less impressed by appearances. You start measuring progress by how resilient your life feels, not how impressive it looks. This is why everything changes when financial stress is gone, not because money solves all problems, but because it stops creating unnecessary ones. You still face uncertainty, you still make mistakes, but you face them from a position of stability rather than tension. And over a lifetime, that difference compounds in ways that are difficult to quantify but easy to feel. If this way of thinking resonates, consider staying here. These conversations are about clarity, not promises. If you found value in this, you can subscribe or like the video. Nothing urgent, just an invitation to keep thinking a little more calmly about money and the role it plays in your life. When financial stress is present for long enough, it doesn't just affect how you spend money. It affects how you experience time. The future starts to feel compressed. Everything important is pushed into the category of later, not because you lack ambition, but because later feels safer than now. Plans become vague, goals become conditional. You tell yourself that once things feel more stable, you'll think more seriously about direction, fulfillment, or change. But financial stress has a way of keeping that stability just out of reach. It convinces you that the next raise, the next bonus, the next life milestone will finally create breathing room. And when it doesn't, you quietly adjust your expectations instead of questioning the structure. What changes when that stress is reduced is not motivation but perception. Time expands. You stop rushing through decisions just to relieve pressure. You're able to sit with uncertainty without immediately needing to neutralize it. This is why people with financial calm often appear more thoughtful, even slower, in how they move through life. They're not indecisive. They're unhurried. They understand that most good outcomes require space to unfold, and space is impossible when every month feels like a deadline. There's also a noticeable shift in how failure is interpreted. Under financial stress, mistakes feel dangerous. A wrong decision isn't just a learning experience, it's a threat to stability. So people avoid experimentation. They stick to what's familiar even when it no longer fits. But when stress is lower, failure becomes information rather than catastrophe. You can try something, observe the result, and adjust. This feedback loop is essential for growth, yet it's inaccessible to people whose financial lives leave no room for error. Another subtle change is in how people relate to comparison. When you're financially stretched, other people's lifestyles feel louder. Promotions, upgrades, and visible success trigger discomfort, not necessarily envy but self-questioning. Am I behind? Should I be doing more? Should I be further along by now? These thoughts aren't driven by ego, they're driven by insecurity. When financial stress eases, comparison loses its grip. You're less reactive to external signals because your internal situation feels stable. Other people's choices stop feeling like judgments on your own. This is also where values become clearer. Without the constant need to optimize for safety, you can ask better questions. What kind of work do I actually want to do? What pace of life feels sustainable? What trade-offs am I genuinely comfortable with? These questions are difficult to answer under pressure because pressure demands immediate solutions. Calm allows reflection, and reflection is where intentional living begins, not in grand gestures but in small, consistent alignments. So when we say everything changes when financial stress is removed, we're not talking about escape or perfection. We're talking about access. Access to time, access to patience, access to clearer thinking. These aren't luxuries reserved for the wealthy. They're byproducts of a life that isn't overcommitted. And once you experience them, it becomes obvious that the true cost of financial stress was never just money. It was the version of yourself that never had enough space to fully emerge.